This is David Wheatley's podcast featuring David Wheatley. This is episode 8, and welcome. We are so glad you're here. It's amazing we've made it up to episode 8. Now we're growing leaps and bounds. Number 1 just had talking and a slide. Then we added music, and 2, and a photo burst, and along with some credits. And now we're up at 8. We've covered some social psychology, individuals, dyads, which is couples, groups, and how they govern themselves, and individuals versus groups, and groups versus groups. We talked about capitalism, pros and cons, the amoeba theory, and the story of that amoeba, a very bold and brave, somewhat contentious amoeba who made it up to the top of a hill. We talk about gifts, loving acts, altruism, if I didn't say that already. And so I'd like to turn deeply inward right about now and look at the social psychology again, especially the individual, thinking that musicians and artists tend to spend a lot of time by themselves, thought of as being introverts. Some people would say navel gazing. We don't like those people that say that. But people who are introspective. And I think it's not fully possible, even when a person is alone, to be fully exempt, immune from, and isolated from these other categories of couples, groups. And I think when a person thinks about anything, even when they're by themselves, that thought is coming from somewhere. So the pressure is on, that's what I find. And just about every group, just about every individual is trying to get me to do something, talk me into something or talk me out of something. And often those individuals are representatives of other groups in category 3 of the social psychology. So the heat is on, even when I'm sitting by myself, because these thoughts pop into my mind. So I'm thinking also about a musician. Once again, in this case, me, sitting at a piano and deciding what to play. And I can already hear people in the audience going, "Hey man, just get over it. Life has its pressures. Deal with it. We all have pressures. I mean, just deal." So when I'm looking at the piano, I see the 88 notes there, 88 keys, black ones, white ones, the lock, like we talked about, with the musical intervals. And the mechanism, you press the note down, the damper that makes the sound stop, lifts up so the new sound can come. The hammer comes up and bangs onto the strings, and then recedes, leaving the strings to vibrate. As long as the note is held down, the damper stays up. When the note is left off, the damper comes down and stops the sound. Well, these machines, instruments, but they are machines, were invented, the precursors were invented hundreds of years ago, with the clavichord into the harpsichord, to the pianoforte, to the pianos that we have now. And someone or a group of people decided that this instrument would be the best and persuaded composers to write for it. Those composers also come from groups based on the culture where they were, which also ties into beautifully topography. What was the topography of that region? Russia, which is unfortunately in the news these days. They're time-stamping the podcast. And Poland and Czechoslovakia, on into France with Debussy, George Handel, Johann Sebastian Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. Each of these individuals expressed the culture that brought them to fruition. And so when I open up a piece of music, let's say Beethoven, right there, the pressure is on to conform to Beethoven's culture, the way he understood it at the time. Also, the notation system, having a clef, 5 lines for a treble clef, 5 lines for a bass clef, and the lines and spaces correspond to notes on the piano. These clefs, by the way, started out as just being one line, so that the monks could say, well, it's above the line, below the line. I know it sounds like I'm a movie producer. The stars are above the line, the crew is below the line, but this is different. But it turned out that those indications were too vague, so they added more lines until we end up with the 5 we have. And as Beethoven wrote this music, it's an expression of what he thought was good at the time, what he thought would be well received, what would be innovative and a departure from what had already happened, and what would hopefully please the audience, and especially please the people that were paying him. Some of this music took years and years to catch on. Some of it went into hiding, so to speak, in some sort of treasure chest someplace, or a chest of some kind. And then the music gets discovered years and years later, when society is more ready to accept it. But it takes society a while to catch on to new things. Some things, pet rocks, they jump on it right away. The Beatles jumped on it right away. But other things like classical music, it takes a long time, especially the new stuff, for it to catch on. Some of it is disparaged, such as the legend around Stravinsky's music for the ballets. A legend has it that tomatoes were thrown. I can't verify that. I wasn't there. And it would take one of our researchers that we've talked about but don't have yet to delve into this and find out if this is actually true and if salads were made out of the tomatoes. And so there's the influence of the piano on the pianist, and the pianist seeking to engage with these cultures, including the piano itself, in a handshake kind of way, the same way figuratively the pianist would reach out to shake hands with Bach or Beethoven or Steinway or Blüthner or Bechstein. Kawai and Yamaha, I don't want to leave off the new people. Therefore, the pianist gets to and has to, in a pressure way, decide what to play. The teachers also have an influence, especially early teachers. Hand formation. I had a teacher would draw a picture of how the hand should be held. Others, before the animal rights movement kicked in, would write a dog house, and you're supposed to hold your hand in a particular format so the dog can come and go freely and be safe inside the dog house. And these legends carry on, and they become symbolic of cultures and ways of thinking and feeling and believing about things. So I had originally thought in studying social psychology, well, this is going to be easy. We'll just have an individual, they'll be fine. We'll put them out in the forest in a cabin. They can have a nice day, grow some vegetables, come into town once a month to pick up some other things they can't grow, and go on with their merry lives. But upon further reflection, it's more and more apparent that these individuals are under, at times, extreme pressure to conform to the groups that are around them, even when the groups aren't physically present. To belabor that, the groups are physically present by their communications. And we talked earlier about one of the purposes of these podcasts is to communicate back. So many messages coming from the various lines of communication. And the sources coming into my brain, that's for sure. And I have to and get to deal with them. As I said, that's partly why these podcasts are being recorded, to be able to respond to what I've been dealing with for decades. So yeah, a couple thousand podcasts from now, we should have it all covered. But for now, we're just merrily chomping along at episode number 8. So with that, I'm going to pause this one, and we can all gear up for number 9. I'm going to gear up with to what I'm going to say in episode 9. The Clompers are back, ladies and gentlemen, the Clompers who once again want to be part of this podcast. So we're allowing them in. We're not going to have those edited out because the listener needs to know what we're all dealing with over here. It's not just about us, but there are other groups and forces at play, which ties in nicely to the theme of this podcast. So thank you for listening. I hope you'll go to patreon.com/David Wheatley and become the philanthropist you were meant to be and make a contribution. David Wheatley10@gmail.com is another good way to send a note. A musical note, ideally a written note, and I look forward to hearing from you. And thanks for listening.